Professor, we just saw the new developments in Iran with Iran counterattacking Trump's offensive. How close we are into a war?
Well, everything we say now is speculative. We were not expecting such a rapid response, so everybody is caught off guard, most certainly. I personally don't think that it's in anybody's interest to engage in an all-out war. I think that these attacks were somewhat inevitable because, as you see from the outpouring of grief on the streets of Iran, the people were demanding some sort of revenge, some sort of reaction. So it would have been unusual and problematic internally for the leadership just to sit back and not do anything. So someone who is moderate or very soft-spoken, usually like Foreign Minister Zarif, he immediately said that we will respond in a proportionate manner, but that we would respond. And so this is right now quite disconcerting. But I think that after this episode, hopefully things will cool down. I'm also hopeful that Trump, with his tweet saying all is well, is trying to confine the crisis.
When one looks into Iran reality,
Right.
we were used to see a regime that was portrayed as a dictatorship, and then we see millions of people in the street. How can we read that?
Well,
Are people forced to go into those manifestations?
No, absolutely not. I mean, this kind of narrative of Iran being a dictatorship or a totalitarian government is very reductive because Iran is actually, it has democratic institutions, political norms and practices that are embryonic in democratic flavor compared to Western societies, but it does have democratic institutions. It's a hybrid theocracy-democracy. So there are political processes that are considered pluralistic, but not to the standards of the West, not fulfilling the standards that we are used to in Europe. But of course, Iran has been on a trajectory of political development for many years now, and we do see signs of reform within the government, within the administration as we see it today. It's not only when it's a reformist government or a moderate government. We've had all along measures where we've seen the development of civil society, bills, different sorts of legislations that have been passed that show that the entire political polity is aware that it needs to reform itself gradually. So people are not, they don't perceive the government as entirely dictatorial. There are some repressive features within the government, but those can be explained also by this heightened sense of insecurity that Iran has, with national security being first and foremost on its agenda. It doesn't have the space or the maneuverability to allow democratic institutions to develop further. So the people that we see on the streets, these are people that have been hurt by this assassination. They are people that feel that this has been an affront, a direct attack on them, on the Iranian people, and not necessarily just on the regime or the state or on General Soleimani himself. So there are, this is a genuine act of collective grief, collective mourning, having lost such a colossal figure in Iranian politics.
When one follows Iranian politics for the last month or so, we were witnessing massive rallies against the government measures, and it looked the country was split in several, shall we say, factions, and the killing of Soleimani had a perverse effect on that way.
Absolutely. It's united the people. So we have images in Iran that have come out of ladies clad in chador from head to toe, completely covered, and then you have a younger, more European-looking young woman with makeup and hair all done and visible, hugging each other in sorrow and in grief, mourning Soleimani's death. And so you see two different, not just classes, it's not necessarily class-based, it's two different cultures or subcultures within Iranian society now merging together. Trump has brought the Iranian nation, has created a sense of national reconciliation, and this is probably one of the inadvertent effects of his ill-thought policies.
When one looks into Iran, Trump argues that Soleimani was their biggest enemy. He had blood from hundreds of Americans on his hands. Was this a way to sort it out a problem, or it's magnifying it?
Well, it depends. I mean, this is obviously the statement that he's going to make officially, but the fact is, and CNN has reported it years ago, that Soleimani was instrumental in fighting ISIS, Daesh, Taliban, al-Nusra, and I mean, this has been documented. This is a fact. And the ISIS caliphate was dismantled by General Soleimani. So one of the things that people overlook is that this was a person who was defending Iran against ISIS. So many people inside Iran feel that because he was mostly operating on foreign soil, they believe that he was defending the Iranian people, the Iranian nation, from becoming enslaved to ISIS. So he wasn't associated with some of the more repressive policies within Iran, within, let's say, the IRGC or the different militia or the factions within Iran. So they didn't associate him with anything that was repressive. He was just seen as a national hero and a person who was defending the Iranian soil and also the region and the Shia brethren as well.
If Donald Trump fulfills his threat of retaliating any attack from the Iranian side, which happened now, what do you think will be the next steps that we can expect?
So if Trump retaliates from... I think that we will continue having these different tit-for-tat scenarios. So there are over 100 US bases in the region around Iran. So Iran has some targets, and it has studied these targets very well over the span of years. So both countries know that it's not in their interest to escalate. Right now, they need to de-escalate, diffuse tension. I think that Iran was adamant about responding, and it has. And now it needs to just step down a little bit and cool things down. Trump, I'm surprised with his tweet. I'm hopeful that he's going to understand that now this is perhaps another scenario like we had in the summer when Iran shot down the US drone. And Trump was wise enough to say, well, you know, I don't want to launch a military attack on what would probably end up in at least 100, 150 lives, Iranian lives. So let's just leave it here. And I'm hoping that he's going to follow that approach because that's in everybody's interest.
You are a researcher also in Russia. How do you read Moscow quietness so far on this issue?
Yeah, Moscow's been, is always, it always takes the position that we should never trespass on a country's sovereignty, on any country's sovereignty, not just Iran. What we had happen with the assassination is that Trump had also trespassed on Iraqi sovereignty by attacking two officials of two countries he's not at war with. So this was an act of war without the declaration of war. This is, in Russia's view, illegal. So Russia is not an ally necessarily of Iran, but it is aligned with Iran in terms of how it perceives the international order and certain principles that underpin its vision of the international order, which are premised on a country having the right to assert its own particular form of government, its own political model, non-interference in domestic affairs, and generally that is Russia's line. So it has made a statement, it has condemned the assassination, and it will continue to do so, but it won't get dragged into anything. It will not come to Iran's military aid should one day this escalate. It will always be on the margins because in principle it agrees with Iran. They share the same views ideologically about American hegemony in the region and how it's important to sort of balance it out or create other orders within this multi-order. And so they're aligned in that aspect. Russia won't be dragged into anything, but it will support Iran consistently, as it has. But there will be a boundary when it comes to this kind of crisis. It won't be dragged into any escalating situation.
When we look to the nuclear deal that was done internationally in 2015, and then Trump just denied it.
Yes.
How do you think Trump has any step to stand on that regard?
Well, this was probably the most foolish act. It set the scene for what we're seeing today, tearing up a multilateral international agreement that was labored over for many, many years with the efforts of different participants and signatories that all were working towards rapprochement, integrating Iran into the international economy, bringing Iran in from the cold. And this kind of recklessness, we're seeing it today. We're seeing the after effects today. And he really has, I believe, because of his own personal ego, he has derailed internationally, globally, something that could have been in both Iran and the United States' interests, and also within the region and globally. Iran could have been engaged rather than isolated or marginalized.
Instead of severing the bridge.
Absolutely. And so what we have today is the counter effects of Trump's policies. Iran is united, and ultimately the US will have to exit from Iraq, which will empower Iran. So his policies have been ill thought in that regard.
We are in a very dangerous playground, if we can put it that way. Portugal has a force of 30 military people helping to train the Iraq security forces. Do you think they should step back and come back to Portugal, or they are looked into as a constructive force in that area?
I think right now emotions are so high, there's so much rancor and so much fervor that it would probably be best for any foreign personnel to, for the meantime, in the short term, to withdraw from the area, because it's dangerous and anything can happen. Like we saw last night, nobody was anticipating such a rapid response. And also right now, because, as I said, because it's a time of a lot of anger, resentment and bitterness, both within Iraq and in Iran. We have the Shia population all very worked up, very, bringing up these martyrdom narratives associating the death of these two officials with, with imams that have died in Shia history. This is all very potent, and I would say that it would probably be safer for troops or personnel to withdraw from the region, from Iraq in particular, simply because the boundaries are not clear right now. Nobody's going to say, well, this person's Portuguese, so they will be seen as complicit to the US agenda right now, which is seen as aggressive and bellicose and dangerous.
As a final question, we are speaking about reality for you. You are not watching a movie. No. You are not speaking about something that is far from your heart. When you look into your country, your nation being hurt this way, how do you look into that part of the world? How does your parents look into this situation?
Well, everybody's distraught because it's very much like what we had in 2009, where we had those massive protests. You have a feeling of helplessness because you know that things there could be a completely opposite scenario, and simply because of one character wanting to assert himself, being driven by megalomania and folly has created so much grief, so much sadness, and it's been counterproductive in terms of bringing about peace and security and stability. Everything has been destructive, and it's almost like Trump has entered into a tailspin, and he's not looking at the consequences of his actions, and anything can happen right now. So we're all just standing on the side, watching, very worried about what can emanate from this crisis. So it is very disconcerting at difficult times.
Thank you, Professor.
Thank you very much.